I was thinking, what would you invent? Because I already have one on the 6th. Neil! Wonderful. Yeah.
Well, I will take just a couple of minutes. First of all, before Carlos gets situated, I'm Brandi Parisi, by the way. I'm the midday host at All Classical Portland. I'm also host and producer of the Oregon Symphony broadcasts. This, of course, as you know, is music director and conductor Carlos Kalmar. Thanks, everybody, for coming early. I do want to mention that tonight's broadcast is being recorded for a future broadcast. That will air on January 9th. All of the Oregon Symphony broadcasts are Thursdays at 7 p.m., but the next broadcast is actually earlier. It's December 5th, and that is the recent concert featuring Johannes Mozart playing the cello concerto by Witold Losowski and Beethoven's Fifth. So don't miss that. Again, that is December 5th. Tonight's concert will be rebroadcast January 9th. You can learn all about that at allclassical.org. Those dates are also in your programs tonight. And I hope you'll be listening to hear your applause and hear these performances all over again. So, big night of music tonight. Let's start with the Mahler. And I was realizing when I was thinking about this, there's a very good possibility we will literally talk for a half an hour about Mahler and then say, oh yeah, and Mozart also.
Yeah, there was this little piece by Mozart.
This little piece by Mozart also. But let's start with the Mahler. Yesterday, my husband asked, what is on the program this weekend? And I said, oh, Mahler 6. And he said, is it the end of the season already? And I said, no, the season just began. What are you talking about? And he said, well, Carlos always ends the seasons with Mahler. And I said, well, not this time.
Well, you know, in actually marketing departments everywhere in the country, and we are no exception, they always want to end the season on kind of a high note. So Mahler 6, no, don't go there.
Well, and in fact, I was looking about the last time this was performed, and it was also in November of 2012. So you're kind of sticking with the theme of having it in the fall, in the late fall, because it is I guess we can say a dark symphony, but it has this nickname, the Tragic. Although Mahler was somewhat ambivalent about using that name, he started with it and then kind of backed away from it.
Well, as always, Mahler, being the person that he was, he had doubts about what, even the title. He was like, yeah, it is the Tragic, but maybe not. And then this famous, I wouldn't call it a controversy, but this famous discussion that we already had since pretty much the symphony reappeared about the order of the inner movements, whether the scherzo comes second or the scherzo comes third. And the great news about that so this is a symphony that has on either side movements 1 and 4 are, I mean, no joke. If you think that the first is no joke, just you wait until you hear the fourth, which is way more of no joke and really meticulous, very long, yeah. very elaborate, and we can talk about that. But the inner movements are very, very different in character from each other, while the scherzo somehow relates to the first movement, at least the beginning of it, and the first theme of it. The Andante is this moment of, okay, let us breathe for a second. I mean, we have been hammering for 22 or whatever time it lasts, probably only in this time 19 or 18 minutes of the first movement, because we don't take the repeat. No, we don't do that, because otherwise the program gets really long.
Really long.
And I thought like, no. And so it's always about the order of these two, because Mahler started with a clear thought. The scherzo has to come after the first movement. And there is a big logic about that, because you will hear that the first movement starts with this stomping march, and in a way the scherzo starts with a stomping march of somebody who is limping, but you don't know on which foot, because the timpani and the cello and the basses completely disagree which foot it is, and it's, trust me, it's not funny at all, that part. And then comes this andante moderato, which is very serene music, and it's kind of like this breath, you catch your breath. And so Mahler started by having this order, and a little bit later he reversed the order of the inner movements, and his second edition of the symphony has that order. And ever since, there are arguments that say let's go to the initial order, and arguments that say no, we keep the order that he later in life conducted. And the good news about all of that is, if you choose one way, you are right, and if you choose the other way, you are right. So, I mean, do whatever you want.
And you chose the second
One
way, right?
I
He started with the scherzo, and you have chosen the second way.
I have chosen the andante because the andante second, meaning this moment of serenity. It has more an emotional reason rather than anything, because amongst others, amongst many things that I read about this symphony, one of the little quotes that I read was about a teacher of mine in Vienna. I remember him well, a wonderful, very, very smart musician who actually made a very strong argument for having the scherzo in second place because of the relationship between the first and the second movement, and which you can't have if you do it the other ways. I completely understand that, but I actually, in the end, the reason why it's emotional is because it has also something to do with, in a way, the way I see this symphony nowadays, and I wonder if they even let me on a podium in 10 years, whether I will still think about that, because, you know, I don't really remember exactly what I was thinking in 2012 when we last did this symphony here. But I can imagine that at that time I thought, well, this symphony is about, roughly speaking, 81 minutes long, 82, give or take. If you know Mahler, you know Mahler doesn't write short symphonies. And this is not only one of the longer, not the longest, but it's for sure emotionally the most challenging and most draining of all, by quite a margin. It sucks the life out of it. I mean, I tell you that at the end of Mahler 6, you're going to be exhausted. You. We too, yeah, sure.
You've been living with it.
Yeah,
all week, though.
Yeah, it's back hurts, and so I thought maybe 7 years ago my thinking was this one of a slightly calculated emotionality, meaning don't throw away everything you have in the first 2 minutes, because you have still 78 minutes to go. And now I think more like, just don't think about that, how long this piece is or what will come. Yes, I know it, the musicians know it, but that's not the point. Just go. So delve with it. It's like this, when you start the symphony and you have this march, that is, it's very clearly a march. And it says on the page, Allegro moderato. What the hell does allegro? Allegro means fast, and moderato means moderately fast. What the hell does that mean? And you have to think about context. What does it mean? Because allegro moderato, as written by Mr. Brahms, doesn't mean the same as written by Mr. Mahler, doesn't mean the same as written by Mr. Schubert or Mozart, etc. So you think about that. And in my case, I thought that actually it's important to don't give all of us who are in the room this moment of rest. I remember, and this is it's just a thought. It's not more. It's not in the music. It's just a thought that when I finally got to the first movement and we were playing, and the orchestra was really playing well, but it was not exactly the character. I stopped after a minute and said something technical, which doesn't matter, and then I said, I want everybody to be on this page, that this movement, the entire symphony to some extent, has the word relentless written all over. So it's not like this dum, dum, how it starts. It cannot be, from the emotionality of it, cannot be like, okay, let's sit back, cross our legs, and then here come the soldiers, and isn't it pretty? Thanks. And okay, there were no stuff like, no, cannot be any of that. It's coming at you.
Yes.
And you don't think about, yes, you know it will happen, tragedy will happen. Yes, at the end you're dead.
Like fate.
Yeah.
It's relentless but inevitable also. It is coming.
You cannot escape at all. So go after it. We'll see.
This symphony was written during a happy time in Mahler's life. He was at the pinnacle of his career. He was happily married with 2 children, I believe, by this point, 2 small children. And yet he sees fate. He sees the inevitable tragedy that every life is going to have. He doesn't know what his own personal tragedy is going to be, but he's seeing this off in the distance. And that is working its way into this fatalist symphony. And this is part of the reason I'm curious, that he calls it the tragic, and then he backs away. And instead of the tragic in this bad sense, I wonder if he's in the sense, the amour fati, the love one's fate, all of it, the tragic, but also the wonderful, and this is part of it too.
Well, first of all, I can imagine 2 things come to mind. First of all, Mahler knew, as we all do, life ends one day, and whatever we do during our life, we all end the same way. We just die. And I assume that Mahler as a person, I don't recall reading writings about that, but I can only imagine that he was having death as the inevitable result of life. He was probably not happy about that, about the fact that life, I mean, who is?
Right.
Yes, let's go and die. And yeah, he probably was scared to some extent, and he thought death is something that one way or the other is accompanied by something very tragic and very horrible and very rude and all of that. Imagination. And the other part, which comes in the symphony, and not only in this, is the role of the march, the military. In this symphony, and I think there is some truth to it, there is a colleague of mine, one of the best Mahler conductors that were around. He's dead. Klaus Tenstedt, whoever knows him. Klaus Tenstedt, absolutely incredible conductor, and especially in Mahler, he saw, in a way, the horrors of the Nazis in this symphony, which was written 30 years before the horrors of the Nazis actually happened. And of course, we who have this benefit of having lived one way or the other through our personal history, through Nazi times, because at least my generation, my parents had to escape and ended up in South America and all of that. So we are very kind of in sync with that idea, and all of a sudden I see layers in this music that might have something to do. And if nothing else, it's this sense, probably in Mahler's music in general, that military soldiers' marches are always, no matter how you approach the idea of that, they are always accompanied by tragic, because, well, I mean, whatever a soldier's role is in whatever time of life, 500 years ago, today, 60 years ago, their their purpose, even if you call their purpose to defend something, is always actually to end somebody else's life. And I think Mahler saw something in that in his early times, and it got to him. And that's why marches, sometimes funeral marches, are all that in his music is full of that. This, by the way, is the Symphony number 6, does not have a funeral march. No. But, well, the other stuff.
Yes. Yes, the other stuff. And, I mean, at the same, in that first movement, where we're introduced to that motif of fate, we're also introduced to Alma's theme, her motif as well, that he tries to musically represent her, his beloved wife, in this symphony that also, again, ends. We know how it ends. We'll talk about how it ends in a moment. But he also brings this part in as well, this very loving and this dedication to her.
Yeah, but yes, but still there is this somehow, I would call it the troubled part of emotionality to that. If Mahler would have said, I dedicate my second, the Andante, the slow movement, to kind of thoughts about my wife, I would have said, aren't you a wonderful man? Everything is serene, life is good, music floats, great. But he doesn't. It's in the first movement, it's highly emotionally charged. Yeah. And let's just say it, yes, Mahler was very happy at the time he writes this symphony, which is his darkest. However, I can only imagine that he was kind of, the thoughts about what can happen in his life, even in his marriage, kind of were tormenting him all the time. I mean, he was a man who came into even the idea of marriage fairly late in life. Then he marries a woman after a very short courtship. He was 20 years younger than he is, and she was undoubtedly one of the most fascinating women of her times. And her times were long, by the way. I mean, Mahler is only one. Later she married Walter Gropius, the architect of the Bauhaus. She had several lovers who kind of are like, who is famous, and finally she married Franz Werfel, the great Austrian master of literature. So there was a lot of trouble everywhere. And on top of that, amongst the many dark things that were happening, there were wonderful things happening between Gustav and Alma, 2 children, 2 daughters. However, there were dark things because Alma Mahler was a very, very talented composer in her own right when she wrote songs, art songs, when she was in her teens, and was probably a promising career. And unfortunately, Gustav Mahler was one of those, meaning one of those men. The minute they married, he said to her, you're not going to have a career. It's my career. You just take care of the household. And that didn't, in the end, it didn't go very well in the longer run. But one of the most famous things that happen in this symphony happened actually in the 4th movement. And of course, everybody who knows this gets kind of drawn in by when will it happen? And that's why this is here. Yes. So, as if Mahler wouldn't have enough percussion on stage, on the back you will see the famous hammer blows. So every percussionist, lead percussionist in this country salivates over those. Because first of all, I mean, we are talking percussionists, so percussionists, occasionally they can play incredibly soft, but sometimes they can play really loud. You think loud, the hammer is louder. And so there are, in the original version, again, 3 hammer blows. And in the version that is later, and that's the one that we actually decided for, there are only 2. And so you have to build kind of this thing, it's a thing of wood, it's double plywood, this thick, and then twice you take out the hammer and hit it pretty much as hard as you can without destroying it. And oh, wonderful. We had, by the way, in the second rehearsal, we had a visitor.
Is that Dennis Dixon?
Dennis
right?
Dixon.
The football player. Yeah. This is
Yeah.
on Instagram, by the way. You can see the video
So
of what happens.
Dennis, wonderful. He's a quarterback of the Ducks.
You're really asking the wrong person right now.
Well, you asked
He
the
plays football. So when we were talking about this at the station, literally Krista said, he's an athlete, I think, of some kind. I don't know, sports. You know, he plays football. We know that.
Wonderful, wonderful guy. He came here because somebody saw him with his workout routine, and he used something like a hammer to hit on probably a tire of a truck. And somebody had this like, wow, Mahler 6. So we invited him and we took a little video of Dennis, and it was wonderful because, I mean, you're talking about a consummate sportsman. I mean, there is something going on there. And so Neil, our principal percussionist, trained him well, so he knows this is how you do it. And then Dennis hits it the first time, and I say, Dennis, that was wonderful what you did. Okay, can you please not hit it clonks? Just go. So we had 2 more runs, and the second he really, he caused some damage on the thing.
A piece flies off. So check out the video when you can. It's on the Oregon Symphony website as well. A piece of the box actually flies off into, So was it fixed?
I'm sure it's fine. It's fine. It's a piece of the box. I mean, trust me, that's the challenging thing about the hammer blows is you have to hit it hard, but not hard so it actually is destroyed, because there is still another hammer.
You have to hit it again.
Whom are you going to hit on the second hammer blow? So the reason there are hammer blows in this is that Gustav Mahler somehow, I mean, we all know the story, so we know that his visions, if you will, were actually right. He had this thought that in his life there would be 3 hammer blows of fate, and the third hammer blow would simply fell him like a tree, kill him. And the sad thing is, exactly that happened. First, his oldest daughter dies of scarlet fever. Second, a doctor discovered that he had a heart condition that was incurable at the time it was discovered, and he died at age 51. Of that. And lastly, I don't know, the order doesn't really mean anything. He was ousted of his job in an extremely vicious way. He was the music director of Vienna State Opera, and trust me, I have lived 38 years of my life in Vienna. If you want to have a job, don't go after that job, because everybody's your enemy. Still to this day. Back in those days it was more in the open, because if you're a Jew, then no. And if you have the ethical approach to music like Gustav Mahler, meaning just work, be true, go, then that didn't go very well back then. So Mahler dies.
Mahler dies.
Yeah. So of course, when you talk to the orchestra, this is the great thing about the Oregon Symphony and the stage at which the orchestra is now, that you just don't waste so much time concentrating on technicalities. You just talk about what you think the music means and what character you want. And unfortunately this week I talked quite a bit about, well, life ends. Yes. It's over, and then it's, And so if I can talk about the ending. So I erased the third blow because it was erased by the composer. And it doesn't really matter. At the end, when the music appears that could lead to the third hammer blow, you are already, if you will, in the hospital and you had already one heart attack, so you don't need another hammer blow. And then the music literally gets less and less and slower and softer than soft. And then comes the last 3 bars of this piece, which is like tragedy strikes again. And then you're completely, I don't know, we'll see what happens. This ending makes you speechless. I mean, it only works if you had before 80 minutes of music. You have to go through that. You cannot play this 3 minutes, the last 15 seconds and say, see, that's tragedy. No, you have to go through all of it.
I told you we were going to do this.
Yeah, and we would not talk about this.
So Mozart, he wrote 5 violin concertos. You're going to hear one of them tonight. But it's also the debut of Avery Fisher career grant winner Lexi Kenny with the Oregon Symphony. Just a little bit.
Wonderful musician, so refined, and I can't wait to work with him again in something, whatever it is. But he brings exactly the right quality of phrasing, elegance, and everything to Mozart. And this Mozart concerto, this concert in its own right is full of mysteries. Why the hell does Mahler write a symphony this tragic when he's actually a happy camper? Why does Mozart write 5 concerti for violin when he was a teenager? He was 19 years old, and what the hell did he do in the rest of his life?
Piano concertos.
Oh yeah, there were a bunch of operas and symphonies, and yeah, I mean, he did well. No complaints so far, but he forgot. Yeah. He did it, and fine.
Done.
Yeah, done. And this is, and why on earth do we hear concerto number 3, 4, and 5, never 1 and 2? Are they actually bad music? No, they are not. They are really good. But, I mean, 3, it's, you know, when it comes this moment, it's the last thing I say, because otherwise Jacob is like, when this is the way the week unfolded. We rehearsed Mahler, and then we rehearsed Mozart. And Mahler is, well, you'll hear it. And then you have this concerto by Mozart, which uses, if even, a quarter of the orchestra. Everything is subtle and small. And it is like you have gone to a very fancy, extremely high quality restaurant, eaten a dinner of 24 courses everywhere, and then you go home and you drink a glass of water. Ah, brilliant. And with that, thank you all for coming. Enjoy the concert. You're in for a real treat tonight. Stick to the water afterward. You may want to go home but no, it's a wonderful, wonderful symphony. You're in for a real treat. Enjoy.